Okay, so you may not know this, but the CIA's involvement in Africa, including orchestrating assassinations, has significantly contributed to the bad conditions in Africa. And this is how. Let me tell you how. This is Africa. It is the 1940s and the 50s, and there is a strong decolonization sentiment across Africa. Many African nations are inspired by the principle of self-determination and sought to end colonial rule. But Western colonial powers are resistant to granting African people their independence. They have significant economic and strategic interest in these African colonies. In many cases, African independence was achieved through negotiations, but these negotiations often involved conditions that favored the former colonial powers, such as economic agreements and political alignments. Some African leaders resisted these conditions and faced violent repression. The motivations behind these violent repressions were complex, involving a mix of political, economic, and ideological factors. During this period, both the US and the Soviet Union sought to expand their influence in Africa. At this time in the history of Africa, an organization known as the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, comes into play in a major way. The Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, known informally as the agency and historically as the company, is a civilian foreign intelligence of the federal government of the United States, tasked with gathering, processing, and analyzing national security information from around the world, primarily through the use of human intelligence, and conducting covert actions through its Directorate of Operations.
Introduction.
With the help of this intelligence agency, the history of Africa has been smeared by the tragic assassination of several prominent leaders, many of whom were pivotal in their country's struggle for independence and self-determination. These assassinations were not merely the result of internal political rivalries, but were often influenced or directly orchestrated by foreign powers, particularly during the Cold War era. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a critical and often overlooked aspect of African history, the CIA's involvement in the continent during the Cold War. From supporting apartheid in South Africa to backing coups and insurgencies, the CIA's actions had profound and lasting impact on political stability, economic development, and human rights across Africa. In this video, we explore these controversial interventions, their motivations, and their consequences. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives like this one. 1947 to 1991 was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. This tension was known as the Cold War, that is, fighting each other indirectly by supporting opposing sides in major regional conflict. This was also known as proxy wars. The United States and the Soviet Union saw Africa as a battleground for influence. The newly independent African nations were seen as potential allies or threats, depending on their political alignments. The United States, through the CIA, sought to prevent the spread of communism by any means necessary, including covert operations and assassinations. Even though CIA covert operations are very hard to prove definitively, there is often substantial evidence and credible testimonies that suggest their involvement in various international incidents. This can include patterns of political upheaval, economic disruptions, and the emergence of regimes favorable to the United States' interests. However, the secretive nature of these operations means that concrete proof is rarely available. In this video, as we continue, you will hear the word communism a lot. That was just the word they used for those who did not really see things the way they did. Why did the US sought to prevent communism in Africa? Motivation for the CIA assassinations. Before we look at how the CIA is responsible for the bad conditions in Africa, let's look at why the United States went to the extent of assassinations to prevent the spread of communism in Africa. The United States' efforts to prevent the spread of communism in Africa were primarily driven by the following factors. Ideological conflict. The Cold War pitted the United States and its capitalist allies against the Soviet Union and its communist allies. This global ideological struggle led the US to view communism as a direct threat to its way of life and global influence. Basically, this was an ideological war, communism versus capitalism, with Africa inheriting most of the consequences. For those like me who do not know the difference, capitalism is an economic system which emphasizes private ownership of property and businesses, with the pursuit of profit as a primary motivator. It is rooted in individual liberty, free market, and limited government intervention. Communism is a political and economic system that advocates for a classless society where the means of production are collectively owned and controlled by the state. It promises economic equality, social justice, and worker empowerment. In essence, the US saw communism as not just a rival economic system but as a fundamentally hostile ideology that posed a threat to its domestic order, economic prosperity, and global leadership. This perception drove much of US foreign policy during the Cold War, including its actions in Africa. Economic interests. The US sought to protect its economic interest in Africa, including access to natural resources and markets for its goods. Communism, with its emphasis on state control and potential nationalization of industries, was seen as a threat to these interests. I guess without cheap access to Africa's natural resources, this whole idea of capitalism would not work. As we all know by now, Africa is rich in natural resources, including minerals, precious metals, and oil. These commodities were crucial to the US industrial sector and military complex. For instance, minerals like copper, cobalt, and uranium were essential for manufacturing and technological advancements. The US feared that communist governments would nationalize these resources, cutting off access to Western corporations and potentially benefiting the Soviet Union. In essence, the US saw its economic interests in Africa as inextricably linked to its political goals. By preventing the spread of communism, the US sought to protect its access to vital resources and expand its market, solidifying its position as a global economic superpower. Strategic concerns. The US feared that communist nations would gain a foothold in Africa, leading to increased Soviet influence and potentially destabilizing the region. This could have broader implications for global power dynamics and US security interests. The US believed that communist regimes would provoke instability in the region. This could manifest in civil wars, the support for anti-government insurgencies and rebel groups, proxy conflict, involvement in proxy wars between rival nations, arms race, the introduction of advanced weaponry and military technology. Such instability could have far-reaching consequences, including refugee crises, mass displacement of populations, humanitarian disasters, widespread famine and disease, state failure, the collapse of government, and the creation of power vacuums. If you look at history today, you will find that the United States, with the help of the CIA, more than any communist country, is guilty of these things, causing civil wars, proxy conflict, arms race, refugee crisis, humanitarian disasters, state failures, which could be the reason why the United States is not a member of the ICC today, because of the many crimes against humanity it has committed around the world. But I digress. In essence, the US saw Africa as a strategic chessboard where every move mattered. Preventing communist expansion was crucial to maintaining US global hegemony and preventing a shift in the balance of power in favor of the Soviet Union. Domino Theory. The US adhered to the Domino Theory, which proposed that if one country fell to communism, neighboring countries would inevitably follow. Therefore, to prevent a chain reaction, the US actively worked to contain communism wherever it emerged. And it all started in Africa in 1961 in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Patrice Lumumba, a martyr for independence. In 1960, the Democratic Republic of Congo gained its independence from Belgium, which saw Patrice Lumumba as the first Prime Minister of the country.
Je vous salue au nom du gouvernement congolais. À vous tous, mes amis qui avez lutté sans relâche à nos côtés Je vous demande de faire de ce 30 juillet 1960 une date illustre que vous garderez ineffaçablement gravée dans vos cœurs, une date dont vous enseignerez avec fierté la signification à vos enfants pour que ceux-ci, à leur tour, fassent connaître à leurs fils et à leurs petits-fils l'histoire glorieuse de notre lutte pour la liberté. La République du Congo a été proclamée et notre cher pays est maintenant entre les mains de ses propres enfants. Ensemble, mes frères, mes sœurs, nous allons commencer une nouvelle lutte sublime qui va mener notre pays à la paix, à la prospérité et à la grandeur. Nous allons établir ensemble la justice sociale et assurer que chacun reçoive la juste rémunération de son travail. Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir parce que nous étions des nègres. Qui oubliera qu'à un noir, on disait tu, non certes comme à un ami, mais parce que les voix honorables étaient réservées aux seuls blancs. Nous avons connu que nos fils spoliés au nom des textes prétendument légaux qui ne faisaient que reconnaître les droits du plus fort. Nous avons connu que la loi n'était jamais la même, selon qu'il s'agissait d'un blanc ou d'un noir, accommodante pour les uns, cruelle et inhumaine pour les autres. Nous avons connu les souffrances atroces des relégués pour opinion politique ou croyances religieuses. Exilés dans leur propre patrie, leur sort était vraiment pire que la mort elle-même. Nous avons connu qu'il y avait dans les villes des maisons magnifiques pour les blancs et des paillotes croulantes pour les noirs. Que les noirs n'étaient admis dans les cinémas, ni dans les restaurants, ni dans les magasins européens. Que les noirs voyageaient à même la coque de péniche au pied du blanc dans sa cabine de luxe. Qui oubliera enfin les fusillades où périrent tant de nos frères. Les cachons furent brutalement jetés, ceux qui ne voulaient plus se soumettre au régime d'injustice, d'oppression et d'exploitation. Cette indépendance du Congo, si elle est proclamée aujourd'hui dans l'entente avec la Belgique, pays ami avec qui nous traitons d'égal à égal, ni les Congolais digne de ce nom ne pourra jamais oublier cependant que c'est par la lutte qu'elle a été conquise. Une lutte de tous les jours, une lutte ardente et idéaliste, une lutte dans laquelle nous n'avons ménagé ni nos forces, ni nos privations, ni nos souffrances, ni notre sang. Cette lutte qui fit des larmes, des feux et des sang. Nous en sommes fiers jusqu'au plus profond de nous-mêmes, car ce fut une lutte noble et juste, une lutte indispensable pour mettre fin à l'humiliant esclavage qui nous était imposé par la force. Ce qui fit notre sort à 80 ans du régime colonialiste, nos blessures sont trop fraîches et trop douloureuses encore pour que nous puissions les chasser de notre mémoire. Quand nous avons connu le travail harassant, exigé en échange de salaires qui ne nous permettaient ni de manger à notre faim, ni de nous vêtir ou nous loger décemment, ni d'élever nos enfants comme des êtres chers. Hommage aux combattants de la liberté nationale. Vive l'indépendance et l'unité africaine. Vive les Congo indépendants et souverains.
Lumumba's vision for a united and independent Congo threatened both Belgian colonial interest and Western geopolitical strategies. His appeal to the Soviet Union for assistance amid post-independence chaos alarmed the United States. The CIA, working closely with Congolese Army Chief Joseph Mobutu and secessionist leaders in Katanga, orchestrated Lumumba's capture and eventual assassination in January 1961. Key events leading to Lumumba's assassination. Congo gained independence from Belgium on June 30th, 1960. Almost immediately, the country faced severe instability, including an army mutiny, Belgian military intervention, and the secession of the mineral-rich Katanga province led by Moise Tshombe. Lumumba's appeal to the Soviet Union for assistance amid the chaos alarmed Western powers, particularly the United States. the CIA under Director Allen Dawes viewed Lumumba as a potential communist threat. The CIA, along with Belgian interests, sought to remove Lumumba from power. They supported Joseph Mobutu, a Congolese army officer who eventually led a coup against Lumumba. Lumumba was captured by Mobutu's forces and handed over to Katangan authorities. On January 17, 1961, he was executed by firing squad, with the involvement of Belgian officers and Katangan secessionists. Lumumba's assassination had profound implications. It marked the beginning of Mobutu Sese Seko's long and repressive rule, which lasted until 1997. The event also symbolized the broader struggle of African nations during the Cold War, where local conflicts were often exacerbated by international interventions. In 2002, former colonial power Belgium admitted responsibility for its part in the killing of Patrice Lumumba.
Ludo de Witte is a Belgian author who wrote a book about Lumumba's murder. The book reveals the Belgian government's complicity and details how Lumumba and two of his associates were executed in a forest and how their bodies were disposed.
It was done during the night, so there were a lot of villagers who were very suspicious. And so very quickly, Belgians and Katangese decided to dig up the bodies and to have the body completely destroyed. And so they cut them into pieces and dissolved them into a barrel of sulfuric acid.
A Belgian officer who was involved later confirmed the book's account, including the part about him removing Lumumba's tooth and keeping it as a trophy.
However, the US has never explained its role despite long-held suspicions. Kwame Nkrumah, the fall of a Pan-African visionary. Kwame Nkrumah, Ghana's first president, was a leading figure in the Pan-African movement. His vision of African unity and his socialist policies made him a target for Western powers. In 1966, Nkrumah was overthrown in a coup that had the silent support of the CIA. The coup marked the end of Ghana's experiment with socialism and set the stage for a series of military regimes. Kwame Nkrumah's overthrow in 1966 is a complex event shrouded in some mystery. Here is a breakdown with more context. Nkrumah led Ghana, formerly Gold Coast, to independence in 1957, becoming the first president. He was a charismatic leader with a Pan-African vision, advocating for unity and self-determination across the continent. Nkrumah's socialist policies and political stance made him a target for foreign powers and his fellow countrymen. Nkrumah's increasingly authoritarian role and suppression of opinion created a domestic opposition determined to remove him from power. Ghana's economic difficulties under Nkrumah's leadership contributed to the growing discontent and provided fertile ground for opposition. After numerous failed assassination attempts during his tenure, including the Kulungungu bomb attack, in 1966, while Nkrumah was on a diplomatic mission, the Ghanaian military and the police staged a coup d'etat, ending his rule.
This coup was carried out completely because of the things that had happened in Ghana and because of the tyranny and the despotism of Kwame Nkrumah, the deposed president. Everybody in Ghana was fed up with it. And therefore you could see this spontaneous result which followed the coup. You would have seen when you were coming probably thinking that Ghana would have been put under curfew or all other things, but nothing was done.
He later suspected that the US had a role in his downfall, and in a 1978 book, former CIA intelligence officer John Stockwell backed this theory up. John Stockwell, in his book In Search of Enemies, wrote that the Accra station was nevertheless encouraged by headquarters to maintain contact with dissidents. He said that the CIA in Ghana got more involved and its operatives were given unofficial credit for the eventual coup. Declassified documents and historical evidence show the CIA had been in contact with some coup plotters. They may have provided financial and logistical support, but the extent of their involvement remains debated. Another declassified document written after the coup described Nkrumah's fall as a fortuitous windfall. Nkrumah was doing more to undermine our interests than any other black African. In 1972, Kwame Nkrumah died in Bucharest, Romania. According to some sources, the reason for his death was cancer. However, his close relatives believed there was a chance he was being poisoned by Western agents. His health began rapidly failing after the mysterious death of his chef while on exile in Guinea. Thomas Sankara, the African Che Guevara. Thomas Sankara, often referred to as the African Che Guevara, led Burkina Faso from 1983 until his assassination in 1987. Sankara's radical policies, including land reforms and nationalization of resources, threatened both local elites and foreign interests. While direct CIA involvement in his assassination remained unproven, his anti-imperialist stance made him a target of Western powers. Sankara's death led to the rise of Blaise Compaoré, who reversed many of Sankara's policies and aligned Burkina Faso more closely with Western interests. Key events leading to Thomas Sankara's assassination. He became Prime Minister in 1983 but was soon arrested due to his radical views. This led to a popular uprising that brought him to power as president later that year. Sankara redistributed land from feudal landlords to peasants, significantly boosting agricultural production. He nationalized key industries and resources, aiming to reduce foreign dependency. He launched massive vaccination campaigns and built numerous schools, drastically improving literacy and health outcomes. He promoted gender equality, appointing women to high government positions and banning practices like female genital mutilation. Sankara was a vocal critic of neocolonialism and foreign aid, which he viewed as tools of exploitation. He advocated for African unity and self-reliance, famously rejecting foreign aid with strings attached. Sankara was assassinated on October 15, 1987, in a coup led by his former ally Blaise Compaoré. While there is no direct evidence of CIA involvement, many believe that his assassination was influenced by his anti-imperialist stance and the threat he posed to Western interests. His legacy endures as a symbol of resistance against oppression and a champion of social justice. Sankara's vision and policies continue to inspire movements for social change and justice across Africa and the world. His life serves as a powerful reminder of the potential for transformative leadership in the face of adversity.
Muammar Gaddafi.
The long-term leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, was a Libyan revolutionary, politician, and political theorist who ruled Libya from 1969 until his assassination in 2011. He came to power through a coup d'etat that overthrew King Idris and established the Libyan Arab Republic. Gaddafi's rule was marked by the promotion of his political philosophy outlined in his Green Book, which combined elements of socialism, Arab nationalism, and Islamic modernism. Muammar Gaddafi's unpredictable behavior and unconventional foreign policy stance might have posed a long-term threat to Western geopolitical interest. His defiance of Western interest, particularly his support for anti-imperialist movements and his attempts to create a unified African currency, made him a target for elimination. Also, Libya boasts vast reserves in oil and natural gas, making it a strategically important region for international corporations and governments. However, Gaddafi's nationalization of the oil industry and his plans to distribute oil wealth more equitably among the Libyan people conflicted with the interests of these powerful entities, potentially motivating them to support his removal from power. On the 20th of October 2011, Muammar Mohammed Abu Minya al-Gaddafi was assassinated with the help of the CIA and NATO during the Libyan civil war. Key events leading to the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. The role of the CIA and NATO. NATO intervention. The NATO operation known as Operation Unified Protector included airstrikes and a no-fly zone to support rebel forces against Gaddafi's regime. The intervention was crucial in weakening Gaddafi's military capabilities. CIA involvement. While there is no direct evidence that the CIA was involved in Gaddafi's capture and death, the CIA did play a role in providing intelligence and support to NATO and rebel forces. This included surveillance and investigation to identify targets and movements of Gaddafi's forces. Final moments. Gaddafi was captured by rebel forces in his hometown of Sirte after a NATO airstrike hit his convoy. He was subsequently killed by rebels, an act that has been widely criticized as an extrajudicial killing. Some saw it as a necessary end to a brutal dictatorship, while others criticized the manner of his death and the broader implications of foreign interventions. Under Muammar Gaddafi's regime, Libya offered significant social programs including free education, healthcare, and subsidized housing. This was a stark contrast to many other countries in the region and contributed to a relatively high standard of living for Libyans.
I want now new Libya.
أمريكا هي اللي السبب الفوضى اللي في ليبيا. طيحت قدافي وما درس بديل. خلتنا فوضى حرب في بعضنا. قدافي نو أمريكا. تو هذا كلهم.
Now you would take Gaddafi back?
أنا قاتلت في جبهة زندان وفي جبهة بن وليد ضد قدافي. ناو كان في قدافي أنا في قاتل مع قدافي.
Apart from the above operations, the CIA has conducted numerous other covert operations in Africa, particularly during the Cold War era, all in the name of fighting communism. Here are some notable examples. Angola, 1970s to 1980s. The CIA supported anti-communist factions during the Angolan Civil War, providing arms and funding to groups like UNITA, National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, led by Jonas Savimbi. The US and its allies backing UNITA and the Soviet Union supporting the People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, led to a protracted conflict with devastating consequences for the Angolan people. Angola is rich in natural resources like copper, manganese, gold, uranium, feldspar, platinum, petroleum, diamonds, iron ore, bauxite, granite, phosphate. Sudan, 1970s to 1980s. The CIA was involved in supporting Southern Sudanese rebels during the First Sudanese Civil War, aiming to counter Soviet influence in the region. Apart from oil, South Sudan is rich in copper, gold, zinc, lead, manganese, iron, silver, tin, and many more. South Africa, 1960s to 1980s. The CIA maintained close ties with the apartheid regime, providing intelligence and support to counter perceived communist threats. This included the controversial tip-off that led to Nelson Mandela's arrest in 1962.
We have turned Mandela over to the South African security branch. We gave them every detail, what he would be wearing, the time of day, just where he would be. They have picked him up. It is one of our greatest coups.
The US maintained strong economic ties with South Africa, despite growing international condemnation of apartheid. South Africa is rich in iron ore, platinum, manganese, chromium, copper, uranium, silver, beryllium, titanium, and many more. These operations illustrate the extensive and often controversial role of the CIA in shaping African political landscapes, especially if the country is rich in mineral or natural resources. The impact of the CIA on the continent. The CIA's intervention in Africa had significant and often detrimental impact on local populations and regional stability. Here are some key effects. Political instability. Many CIA-backed coups and assassinations led to prolonged period of political instability. For example, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo led to years of civil disorder and the rise of Joseph Mobutu, whose authoritarian rule lasted for decades. Economic disruption. Interventions often disrupted local economies. In Angola, the CIA support for UNITA during the civil war contributed to widespread destruction and economic hardship. Human rights violation. Many CIA-supported regimes were responsible for several human rights abuses. The apartheid regime in South Africa, which received intelligence support from the CIA, was notorious for its brutal repression of the black majority. Social fragmentation. Interventions often exacerbated ethnic and social divisions. In Sudan, the CIA's support for rebel groups during the civil war intensified conflicts and contributed to social fragmentations. Loss of sovereignty. These interventions undermined the sovereignty of African nations as foreign powers manipulate local politics to serve their interests. This was evident in Ghana, where the CIA's involvement in the coup against Kwame Nkrumah disrupted the country's path towards self-determined development. These impacts highlight the complex and often harmful legacy of foreign interventions in Africa. Conclusion. The CIA's involvement in Africa has left a complex and often troubling legacy. From supporting apartheid in South Africa to backing coups and insurgencies, these interventions have frequently led to political instability, economic disruption, and human rights abuses. The assassination of African leaders and the manipulation of local politics underscore the need for a more ethical and transparent approach to international relations. As Africa continues its journey towards development and stability, it is crucial that the West stay the fuck away from African issues. It's time for Africans to speak for Africa. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe. Without further ado, see you in the next one.